Something. Terry, how
We're
are
doing
you
something.
doing? Yeah, doing something. I don't know if it's work, but it's something.
We're doing the something. We should change it to
Yeah.
do the something instead of do the work. It'd
Something,
be
something,
great.
something, work, something, something, something,
Something, something,
something,
something
something.
work. This has become really our excuse to have a video chat for 30 minutes before this happens every week at this point. Like, why do you keep doing this work? Because I get to talk to Phil for 30 minutes before I go on the air. Yeah.
Too easy,
All the
Rich.
audience is just an excuse for us to hang out because otherwise we're too busy.
Yeah. We have to put it on the calendar in a scheduled content setting.
Yes,
It's fine.
absolutely.
All right,
No,
Terry.
we're good,
I got
man.
a question
How are you
for you,
doing?
though. I'm good. What's your favorite pescatarian meal?
Oh, dude. You know, we did rice bowls on Saturday with the pescatarian gluten free crew that was here before they came to your house, and we had some. I think it was southwestern shrimp and some salmon. That was my favorite because it was real good. It was rice and black beans and some carrots and some other vegetables thrown in there and some shrimp. The shrimp was excellent. It was good. That was my favorite of the week.
You can write that down. You can save that for the next visit. And
We,
look,
we took them
rice
out for
bowls
Mexican.
hard to
We took
mix.
them out for Mexican too, and that was good because then anybody can get whatever they want. So
Yeah.
when you're living in that environment with those people with all those different food things, I don't know if you knew this, but the pescatarian's also allergic to nuts. So out of those two people that were extra in my house, no gluten, no dairy, no nuts, and vegetarian or fish only. So yeah, yeah.
There's a great joke in there somewhere. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to write that one out. I'm going to get a great joke for all of that. Pescatarian and a gluten free. Walk into your house. Yeah, there's something there. There's
Well,
somewhere.
yeah.
There's something
So
good.
Wednesday
Pesky
night they're
roots.
in
I
there.
don't know.
Wednesday night they're in class with me, right? I'm the teacher now. I wanted to start off with some joke of, a vegetarian and a celiac walk into a bar, but I didn't have anything after that.
Yeah.
Like what?
Where do you go from there?
What do you do with that? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't know where to go with any of that. So, hey, look, it was great to have them home, and I know you enjoyed having your kids home, and you enjoyed
Yeah.
having that mess of people with you Saturday night. And I get to see Alexis and Jillian tonight because after this broadcast is over, I'm gonna go home, pack up a few things, grab a quick bite to eat, and head to Freed Hardeman to watch them play soccer tonight. Hopefully, they beat the Lions. So.
Yeah, I'll try to bring the video camera. I may or may not be on the campus of Florida College on Saturday for the Country Music Fest, and it would be
Oh yeah,
quite intriguing to see Alexis's response to the Country Music Fest.
yes. I think Alexis is the hidden talent. I think they should get Alexis to play drums at the Country Music Fest. That would be even more interesting, by the way. If you can make that happen, where Alexis is the drummer for a country music act, that would be amazing.
I will be sending a text message out to a particular ensemble to see if they can get her as a special performer.
I'm telling you, can you imagine British drummer country music group? It's fantastic.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have some connections in that area that maybe I can make something happen. So
and you just have to pay her in shrimp, basically.
I know.
That's it. Yeah,
shrimp and salmon.
Shrimp, salmon.
She'll work for shrimp.
Big deal. Yeah,
she'll work for shrimp.
We'll work for shrimp.
Yeah, we'll work for fish and chips.
Yeah. Which I learned all about that. Like chips are not really fries. There's chips, there's wedges, there's.
I know we had a whole discussion of that waiting in line at McAllister's.
Yeah.
No, when they say chips, what do they mean? I'm like, no, not your chips.
Chips are steak fries. Wedges are seasoned. Regular fries are regular fries, basically. Like, I mean, I learned all of these things about real English.
We got to ask about the curly fries. Like, where do they fit into this? Because they're kind of a cross-cultural thing.
I don't know.
Are they pasta fries?
I don't know. There's so many things I learned last week that I did not know. I mean, honestly, like it was, and by the end of it, we're calling everybody our mate after 4 days. We're like, hey, my mate called. Like, I have a show called Do the Work with my mate Philip. I mean, it's just it's how it is. Yeah, it was fantastic.
It's good stuff. All right, so let's get on to the heart of the matter. Is we have hit the top of the hour, plus or minus 2 minutes. the question of the day, often we have the what about, but this is what kind of preacher do you want? And I intentionally didn't feed Terry with any of my sub notes as to what I was thinking when I came up with the topic. Sometimes I do.
I already know that.
Most
I
of the
just need
time
to
I do not.
describe you. I just gotta. I need him to be tall, preferably a drummer, wears a kilt, loves the
There's nothing wrong with any
outdoors,
of those choices.
really academic. You know, that's the kind of
Half that's a
preacher I
lie.
want.
That's a lie. The other part of it's untrue.
I would say good looking, but we know that's not true.
I believe I have evidentiary import, at least one individual who will disagree.
Jill doesn't count, dude. Jill does not count. She's biased. It doesn't count.
Hey, I'm just saying
No.
it's factual evidence in the ledger.
Yeah.
So Terry, if someone asked you, hey, like what kind of preacher should we look for? Because that's a question that actually is of import in local churches.
We actually get that a lot, by the way. You and I get phone calls asking us for advice in this area quite a bit.
Yeah. Lately, I get 2 calls more often than not. The first part of the call is, hey, we need to find someone. The second call is, what should we be looking for? They're like hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I'll come out before I go too far with that. I am very reluctant to give specific note of this person would be a good fit for you. Like I just not comfortable doing that. It's not because I don't believe that there are good men. It's not believe I can't that I couldn't recommend anybody. It's this general acknowledgement that I don't know enough about local congregation X, Y, or Z to combine that with evangelist ABC and say, Paul Hammonds, maybe we'll call you in as a guest appointee. If you want to get your hair together, man, we'll bring you right in.
I'll say this about that. Yeah, this is one of those deals where, like you, I'm very reluctant to go, this guy's really good, because I don't know the guy very much either. Like you and I are friends. I would recommend you to some places because I know you well. I don't know everybody well, and I don't know every church well. So there's times where I will say things like, hey, this guy's looking. And I'll say, I know this church is looking, but I don't recommend because I don't want somebody to come back to you and go, that was awful. Why did you tell me to go there? You know? I just, and at the end of the day, I'm very cautious about that as well.
And there's depth of, like we talk about not knowing someone very well. We may know somebody's preaching very well because of interaction with it over the years. We may know their approach to the process of presenting a message. We may know the quality of their delivery. We know the depth of their experience in different communities. Like, hey, they've been in different situations before. That still doesn't mean we necessarily know the answer to the question, but it doesn't mean we don't get asked that question. Like what kind of preacher do you want is more than just kind of this relational exchange between an evangelist and a church, because part of my process for this, and this is the reveal for Terry, is thinking about it in the sense of the preacher you kind of gather into the flock on day one is not the preacher that you have a year from that, nor is it the preacher 5 years down the road. And no matter what takes place, the local church, the elders, and the community that you're in change that preacher over time. And
for the good or the bad.
And you can be intentional about it. You can actually like plan it out and say, this is what we're looking for, and this is how we're going to help you. I'll talk about it this way, at least on my personal kind of approach to things. When I moved from Wilsonville, Oregon to Cookeville, Tennessee, one of the things the elders told me was, hey, during the time between the last minister that was here and now, we've been having our members preach for us on a regular basis, and we want to continue that. And so that means that in this case, the fifth Sundays, Sunday morning and Sunday evening, no matter what's going on with your travel schedule, no matter what's going on with your meeting schedule, we are going to have our local members preaching on that day.
Right.
And that was new to me because it hadn't happened at all growing up with regularity, growing up in Christ, from the day I was baptized until working with the church at Wilsonville, or out there for manpower concerns in many cases. Like that, you can't necessarily, in smaller groups, the bodies aren't there to rotate around. And so you end up taking more on your table rather than a little bit less. And so all of a sudden, I had time to read outside of the next sermon. And so that really kickstarted my opportunity to grow my own understanding. And so if there was a benefit that they invested in, maybe for other reasons, but it changed me in some ways too. And so I think there's an aspect of that really isn't clarified very well. And there are some ways that you can kind of think through that. Also, the relationship you want to have with the local church, both from either side, is going to change the preacher that you end up with. And it may be a reflection of what you think that relationship looks like. You think about, there are some guys, through the nature of their work, who travel more. Maybe they do a lot of meetings. Maybe they're overseas a bunch. That changes that relationship. And there's nothing, look, I'm looking at all of these as value neutral. These are not necessarily good nor poor aspects, but there's certainly things to be explored because they do change things. And there's stereotypes to think about too, which also have good and bad components to them. So Terry, if you're thinking about this, because I know you've done internships in the past, I know you've kind of dabbled with it a little bit there at Chelsea in different ways and thought about it with some of the young men that you have there in the congregation and the community. From your perspective, how do you talk to a young evangelist who doesn't necessarily have the benefit of years of adjustment to understand this in advance and how they will change and how that will affect them? Because they get to become the kind of preacher that they want.
Well, I think you just explain it as, we call it change, but it's really just growth. That's what it is. And we are always growing. I think that's the key. And you have to explain it as trying to grow into a better version tomorrow than what you are today. I think one of the things that's really key to that, by the way, in order to help the preacher grow into who he needs to be, you need to make sure that he is seen as a sheep rather than a hireling in that context. That's congregation wide. And what I mean by that is if a guy's a hireling and he needs to change to grow, and he's a hireling, the way that's usually facilitated in our churches today is we fire him and hope he learns at his next place. If he's seen as a sheep, then the shepherds will sit down with him and help him grow. And that's something to be seen there. But there's a requirement there for the evangelist we're talking about. And I think that's the first thing I would suggest that to me is, when you ask me what kind of preacher do we want, do we need, one that's got some humility. That's the key characteristic, to allow yourself to actually change for the better, is that you're humble enough to realize. And by the way, that's really hard, Phil. It's really hard to take a guy whose expectations are essentially to be on stage and lead the church every time he's there. And I know that the elders are the leadership, but the reality is the preacher gets a lot of emphasis because of what he does. We have a lot put on us just because FaceTime, if nothing else. We have the most FaceTime. And it's very important that you learn that, even though I was just reading through 1 Corinthians 4 today, studying for next week. And it's interesting that in there, the Corinthian brethren are like, because they have some wisdom now, they think they're great, and they're even questioning Paul. And Paul in there kind of does this whole sarcastic thing in the middle of chapter 4, where he's like, "You guys are kings, and we've become the scum of the world." Like, I think there's this, and while he's being sarcastic, there has to be this mentality that I'm not special just because I get up and speak every week. I'm not special, and even if I do it well, that doesn't make me special. Like, there needs to be some humility there, and so that all goes together. And when a guy, to get back to your question, when a guy struggles that I've worked with, or a young guy reaches out to me that's struggling because the church wants him to change, and it's in a way he needs to change, and they're doing it the right way, then we talk about having the humility to see the need to grow is the way we talk about that. That's the real issue. And it's hard. Again, I know I've battled that. I'm sure you have too. To struggle, because especially when somebody comes up and suggests something to you need to hear, your first thing is, well, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's so easy, why don't you do this thing?
Yeah.
And that's
the gut response.
That's the gut defensive response. And that's
Yeah.
not good, by the way. That's not good at all.
Right. Here's another way to approach this. And this is kind of looking outward on the outward side, trying to see inside. There are stereotypes that we think fit certain things. If you talk to preachers my age and up, 50 and above, they are probably more acutely aware that the change in their family dynamic is no longer in a position to have them be attractive to some churches, because they'll look at them and go, well, we think we need a guy with kids.
We're on the verge of preacher extinction, brother. You and I, we're right up against the cusp. We're on the cusp of not being relevant anymore, because our kids are old enough to leave home. And if you don't have young kids in your home, you're not needed. And if you're not 33 years, I joke around that people don't like preachers who've not lived longer than Jesus. Like, once you get to 33 and a half, then all of a sudden, if you get 33 and a half, you're married and you have kids, you're relevant. But if you're 31 and have kids, he's a little young. And I don't even know if we make that connection, but it's always funny to me that it's like this magic number. You know, you get to 33 and a half, you got kids. Oh, this guy's a commodity. Yeah. Once his kids are out of the house at 52, he's out to pasture. You have a window of about this much in the middle of your preaching life that you're relevant.
And that has nothing to do with any kind of true reality, but it's an imposed one.
Yep.
And any number of things can be put in there. I would argue a lot of it has to do with the appearance of control, that the idea of these younger guys to a certain degree can be more managed or controlled in some contexts, or that they feel like they'll be more listened to. There's all kinds of stuff that
Paul's right here. If you'll put that up on the screen, this is a big thing. It's a way to grow your youth group, and I use that just to make you feel uncomfortable. By the way, some of us.
Oh, that's fine.
But it's a way to grow your youth group, because how can you have a youth group if your own minister doesn't have youth, right, in his home? And because so many people, by the way, choose their churches based on the youth group, whether it's an organized one or unorganized one. That's how we choose churches. Well, I just want to go somewhere where my kids have other people to be around. Well, that's why if you don't have kids, you hire a guy with kids to start that off.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it.
Under the presumption that that's going to fix everything.
Correct.
And I'll highlight it this way. And I think I mentioned this before in one of our earlier conversations, discussing the potential of working with a local church that eventually did want me to move there. One of the couples there looked at me and said, "How are you going to help me save my eldest child?" And I looked back at them in all of the brazenness of my youth and said, "I can't do that." I said, "How can I undo 17 years of your work with 1 year of mine?" And
remember that statement about humility earlier?
Look, I wasn't wrong.
Even when you're right, there's a wrong way to say things.
Yeah. I wasn't wrong.
You know, it's funny because Paul kind of touches on that. He was told Paul doesn't have children. He was told he can't be effective because he doesn't have kids. Which is funny because the passages about raising kids in the New Testament were written by a guy who doesn't have kids and isn't married. Like that's the irony here. It's kind of like the people who go only preach textual lessons when like 98% of all the lessons in the New Testament were topical. Like, yeah, let's get into that discussion. I mean, really and truthfully, it's just funny how we make these arbitrary rules about what we want that they just don't hold up even to the scriptural context when you start to think about it. So here I am, as you know, Paul Hammonds can't teach somebody how to raise their kids. I'm going to teach people how to raise their kids, but I'm going to use Ephesians 6 to do it. Let's think about that.
Well, and I'll argue this in favor. Paul has a lot of experience dealing with a child because have you met Hal Hammonds? That's my answer to that question. And Paul will appreciate that comment.
Yes.
So look, here's
I think we're touching on something that's important, though, that most of the traditional things we look for in a preacher are probably not the things to look for in a preacher. Like, he's got to be married, got to have kids, got to be between a certain age gap, had to go to a certain seminary school, like, let's throw that in there, or work with a certain preacher, or write for a certain magazine, or whatever it is. And those are all the wrong things to look for, Phil. I mean, to me.
And that is separate from the social networking that takes place because you only are always going to go to people you know. In those same demographics you talked about, there's some social networking. But aside from that, like that's not the criteria. And it's always going to end up going poorly. I would say the kind of preacher you want, as like my core answer to this question, is firstly someone who has something worth saying. And that doesn't mean it's the new cultural issue of the day. It means that they have demonstrated either the willingness presently or the effort in the past to learn richly about what God said. Like they've got something that needs to be said that's worth saying. And then secondly, as the next thing, if they cross that bar, then I'll ask the question, can they say it well?
Yeah.
Does it matter? It does, but it doesn't matter as much as the first one.
Those two things are great. Those are after, though, does this person love God? Like, ultimately, the first question has to be, do they love the Lord more than anything else? And the reason I say that is because we just assume because they're a preacher, they do. You need to really look at their life and see what comes first in their life,
And that
doesn't mean that
all this other bouncy, like social fit stuff that matters. It does. It matters if they're a social fit for the congregation. It matters if they're going to be able to be effective in the local community for all kinds of other reasons. Absolutely matters. It may even matter for a local church to say, is this guy potentially going to serve as an elder one day? That may matter. Right. And that's a fair concern in many communities. But like, make sure you're honest about that and open about that. Very often we are uncomfortable talking about things because we're afraid of what it might say about ourselves or others if this is on the table. All those things should be far more transparent, at least in the formative stages of a plan. Okay, this is what's going on. So obviously, you wanted someone who is a genuine disciple. I kind of assumed that, but we'll go ahead and move that to the top of the table. Yeah. And then they got to have something to say, and then they have some ability to say that. Both of those things, you need to want them to change. You need to want them to get to know more and to become more effective. And you have to be supportive of those changes.
Right.
The preacher I was in my 20s would not be effective in the community that I'm in right now in many ways. The preacher I am now would not have been desired in some of the communities where I used to work. And that is not because there's a doctrinal shift. Like it's not because my message changed in significant ways. It's because those two things of arbitrary kind of inclusios have shifted. One of the churches wanted a young family guy. Well, I'm just not that anymore. Like There's evidence to that
Yeah,
shift. Um,
sure.
so those have little to do with theological, conclusions, and a lot to do with other sociological needs that are actually things that local churches who are committed to biblical primitivism still ask. Like, yeah, there's no seminary expectations. Yeah, there's no overarching organization, but we still ask all those same questions.
You say there's
And
no seminary expectations, but there is to a degree in some places.
well, yeah, again, that also
Yeah.
may be a cultural fit. There are churches in middle Alabama, in the big city area around you, you're out in the burbs a little bit, where the community of that congregation is going to expect or want some things out of the preaching that may not be possible for some guys, but that same guy can be tremendously effective in another part of the state and still be in the same state of Alabama, and there'd be no doctrinal differences, no
Sure.
sinful issues. Like, this is not like they may like this is you won't work here. Like, you won't be
I
as effective as you could be somewhere else.
I do think, though, I will say this, sometimes the guy the church wants is not the guy the church needs.
Oh, that's fair.
And I think
Um,
that's one of the things that's interesting about this is sometimes the guy we target that we want is not really what we need because you may want a younger guy that has young kids, but because of things that are going on, you need a guy with gray hair and wisdom
mhm.
to help with some things. And I think that's one of the things that's got to be thought through in this process. We jump to that litmus kind of not litmus, but that standard. We need a preacher. Well, let's get a guy in his 30s with kids who went to Florida College and is really good in the pulpit.
Yeah.
But that may not be what you need. You may need a guy that's older.
You mean a 70-year-old guy who's got the kind of compassionate heart to sit in uh, living room after living room with different members of the congregation and the community, regrounding them in their faith because of issue XYZ. And elders
and
have a tough job in that space, but sometimes there aren't always elders involved to try to
And the
help
other
guide that.
side of that is, Phil, sometimes the preacher may need a certain kind of church too.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we have upside down is that we send all the old guys out to pastor at the smaller churches, or we send the young guys to those smaller churches. And you're in that window, you're in the stable churches. You coast in that 30s, 40s, early 50s, whenever till your kids move out. You're in the churches with good solid leadership. Things are going well. And part of that may be because of the age preacher. Okay, let's not negate that. But there's sometimes where those churches that are stable have great leadership, great shepherds. Rather than getting that 35-year-old who's stable and has so much to offer, they may need to hire the 27-year-old and help him grow into that 35-year-old. I mean, I think both of those things need to be said, that sometimes those things that we want in a preacher that aren't what we need and that's not the preacher that needs our group. As a matter of fact, I think that's really important to think about that.
So this is like the kind of a summary of things that kind of put it all together. And just understand this. Some of these decision processes that take place regarding, we need to get a preacher are arbitrary. Some of them are deeply rooted in what God has said. And some of them are simply just trying to make the best of what's currently going on. Like, well, what is going on in a local church? Some of these, might be what's going on in the local community. And all of them understand that from the preacher's perspective. Either be sensitive to them in that process and be open and transparent that way. If you're the evangelist and you're trying to figure out what to do, be aware of it and be okay with it. Like, and learn to accept that a little bit better, because sometimes our own arrogance gets in the way, and we can't let that happen. And then once you figure out where that spot is, that safe, comfortable zone for you, realize that you're going to eventually outgrow it. Like, you will outgrow where you are now and need to kind of expand things more because you'll mature. You'll get better
Well,
understanding. You'll shift your life in different ways. Life will change around you.
but there is that. I think one of the things to say too is sometimes you don't outgrow where you're at. Everybody grows together, and it works beautifully. Our buddy Mark Russell's been up there in Valpo, Indiana for 30 plus years. and they've all grown together. And I think that's one of the things I would say about this too, is that, this isn't what the broadcast is about, but real quick, if you're in a situation where you think the guy you have isn't what you need, before you get rid of him, figure out if you can help him be the guy that you need.
Yeah.
And that
help
may
him
be
transform some.
Right. Help him grow into what you need and what the church needs. Phil, I got to go. I know you've got to go too. So we had kind of a short broadcast this week, but thanks everybody for joining us.
Yeah. And Colton, say hi to Dad. Dad's there for a week. Say hey from these preacher fellas to another preacher fella.
Yeah.
And
tell your dad to say hi to Mark.
That's right.
He's up in Valpo this week.
Yeah. In all cases, if we can help you in some way, let us know. We are happy to be encouragers, sounding boards, and if you've got questions you want us to talk about, happy to address them. And Paul, if you would do your hair in the advanced settings, we can bring you right in. All you got to do is ask.
If you get up and do the work on your hair, you could do the work.
That's right. Have a great day.
All right.